TWA Flight 847, Hijacking, 1985. A 17-day ordeal of terror, hostage-taking, and murder. The hijacking of Transworld Airlines TWA Flight 847 on June 14, 1985, stands as one of the most infamous acts of aviation terrorism in history. It lasted 17 days, involved multiple landings across the Mediterranean, the brutal murder of a U.S. Navy diver, and the separation of passengers based on their perceived ethnicity and nationality. Orchestrated by members of Hezbollah, also known as the Party of God, the incident highlighted the volatile geopolitics of the Middle East in the 1980s, the vulnerabilities of international air travel, and the complex challenges of responding to state-sponsored or proxy terrorism. This event was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader wave of violence during Lebanon's civil war and the rise of militant Shiite groups. It tested the limits of U.S. foreign policy under President Ronald Reagan, exposed weaknesses in global aviation security, and left a lasting legacy in counterterrorism efforts. What follows is a comprehensive account of the hijacking, its context, execution, human impact, resolution, and long-term consequences. Historical and political background. To understand TWA Flight 847, one must examine the turbulent landscape of Lebanon in the mid-1980s. The Lebanese Civil War, 1975 to 1990, was a multifaceted conflict involving sectarian divisions among Maronite Christians, Sunni Muslims, Shiite Muslims, Druze, and Palestinian refugees, compounded by foreign interventions from Syria, Israel, Iran, and the United States. By the early 1980s, Lebanon had become a battleground for proxy wars, with Beirut often described as a city of ruins. The Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982, Operation Peace for Galilee, aimed to expel Palestine Liberation Organization (PLO) fighters who had been launching attacks into northern Israel. While Israel achieved initial military successes, the occupation radicalized segments of Lebanon's Shiite population, who had previously been marginalized in Lebanese politics. Shiites, concentrated in southern Lebanon and Beirut's southern suburbs, formed the backbone of new resistance movements. Hezbollah emerged during this period, largely with Iranian support and funding. Founded by Shiite clerics and militants, the group positioned itself as a defender against Israeli occupation and Western influence. Its 1985 manifesto explicitly called for the expulsion of foreign powers, the destruction of Israel, and allegiance to Iran's supreme leader. Hezbollah's tactics included guerrilla warfare, suicide bombings, and high-profile hostage-taking to gain leverage and publicity. The group denied direct involvement in the TWA hijacking for years, but evidence strongly links it to the perpetrators. The early 1980s saw numerous attacks on U.S. targets in Lebanon, including the 1983 Beirut barracks bombings, killing 241 U.S. service members, and the U.S. Embassy bombing. These incidents reflected deep anti-American sentiment fueled by U.S. support for Israel and involvement in Lebanese peacekeeping. Aviation became a favored target for terrorists seeking global attention, as seen in previous hijackings like those involving Kuwaiti Airlines. In this charged environment, TWA Flight 847 became a stage for Hezbollah-linked militants to demand the release of Shiite prisoners held by Israel and to showcase their operational reach. The flight and initial hijacking. TWA Flight 847 was a Boeing 727-231 operating a regular route from Cairo, Egypt to San Diego, California, with stops in Athens, Greece, Rome, Italy, Boston, Massachusetts, and Los Angeles. On June 14, 1985, the aircraft departed Athens at approximately 10:10 a.m. local time with 153 people on board, 145 passengers and 8 crew members. The captain was John Testrake, a seasoned pilot and Korean War veteran. Shortly after takeoff, around 20 minutes into the flight, 2 Lebanese men, identified as Mohammed Ali Hamadeh, also spelled Hamadi, and Hassan Izz-al-Din, seized control. They had smuggled a 9mm Browning high-power pistol and 2 Soviet-made F-1 grenades through Athens airport security, which was notoriously lax at the time. A third accomplice, Ali Atwa, was unable to board because the flight was full and was later arrested in Greece. The hijackers, claiming affiliation with Islamic Jihad, a Hezbollah front, stormed the cockpit and forced the pilots to divert to Beirut, Lebanon. They immediately began separating passengers, asking for those with Jewish-sounding names and focusing on American military personnel. Passengers were terrified as the gunmen waved weapons and threatened to blow up the plane. The aircraft landed at Beirut International Airport around 11:55 a.m. Additional Hezbollah militants boarded, bringing the total number of hijackers and supporters to around a dozen or more at various points. 19 passengers, mostly women and children, were released during this initial stop as a gesture, but the core demands remained: the release of over 700 Shiite prisoners held by Israel. Detailed timeline of the 17-day ordeal. The plane was forced to crisscross the Mediterranean multiple times due to fuel needs and negotiations. It landed in Beirut 3 times and Algiers, Algeria, twice. This constant movement exhausted the crew and passengers, who endured heat, fear, and sporadic violence. June 14th, Day 1. Hijacking and first Beirut landing. Some passengers released, demands issued. June 14th to 15th. The plane flies to Algiers, where more passengers, about 20, are released. Tension builds as hijackers identify U.S. Navy personnel among the passengers. June 15th, Day 2. Return to Beirut. This marks the most horrific moment of the crisis. U.S. Navy Seabee diver Robert Dean Stetham, 23 years old, was singled out because of his military identity. He and other divers, Stuart Dahl, Tony Watson, Jeffrey Ingalls, Kenneth Bowen, and Clinton Lee Suggs, were beaten severely. Stetham was tortured for hours, bound, beaten with fists, rifle butts, and even bitten. The hijackers attempted to use him to force refueling by demanding he scream for fuel over the radio, but he refused to cooperate, showing extraordinary courage. In the early morning of June 15th, Statham was dragged to the open aircraft door, shot in the head at point-blank range by Hamadeh, and his body thrown onto the tarmac. The murder was witnessed by the crew and some passengers. This act shocked the world and escalated the crisis into a murder investigation. Jewish passengers were also separated and taken off the plane to secret locations in Beirut. Subsequent days, the plane returned to Algiers and back to Beirut. Hostages were gradually moved off the aircraft and held in various locations across Beirut, including hotels and safe houses controlled by Hezbollah and Amal movement affiliates. Negotiations involved multiple parties: the U.S., Algeria, Syria, Lebanon, and indirect channels with Israel. Pilot John Testrick and flight attendant Uli Derrickson demonstrated remarkable leadership, maintaining calm and advocating for passengers. Conditions for the remaining hostages were harsh but varied. Some reported relatively decent treatment in certain locations, while others faced beatings, mock executions, and psychological torment. The hijackers used the media effectively, staging interviews with Captain Testrake, where a gun was visibly pointed at him from the cockpit window. The crisis dragged on for 17 days amid intense international pressure. President Reagan held press conferences, condemning the terrorists and expressing support for the hostages' families. Behind the scenes, diplomatic efforts focused on avoiding direct military action that could endanger more lives, given the plane's location in Hezbollah strongholds. The heroism and tragedy of Robert Dean Statham. Robert Dean Statham's story is central to the human dimension of this tragedy. Born on November 17, 1961, in Maryland, he joined the U.S. Navy as a construction mechanic/steelworker diver, Seabee. He was returning from an assignment in Greece when the hijacking occurred. Statham endured brutal torture without breaking. Accounts from fellow hostages and crew describe how he remained defiant, refusing to plead for fuel or denounce the United States. His silence reportedly helped prevent an immediate rescue attempt that could have failed disastrously. Posthumously, he received the Purple Heart and Bronze Star. The USS Statham, DDG-63, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, was commissioned in his honor in 1995. In 2015, surviving Navy divers from the flight received POW medals. Statham's family, particularly his brother Kenneth, has been vocal in advocating for justice, testifying before Congress about the need to hold perpetrators accountable. Hostage experiences and crew leadership. The 39 remaining American hostages, after initial releases, spent much of the ordeal off the plane in Beirut. Many later shared stories of fear mixed with acts of kindness from some Lebanese civilians. Jewish passengers faced heightened danger and were held separately. Flight attendant Uli Derrickson played a heroic role, using her language skills and composure to negotiate small concessions such as food and water. Captain Testrake's steady leadership under gunpoint earned widespread admiration. The crew's professionalism helped prevent panic. Negotiations, release, and concessions. After intense diplomacy involving Lebanese official Nabi Berri, Amal movement leader with ties to Hezbollah. The hostages were released on June 30, 1985. Israel eventually released some Shiite prisoners, though both sides denied a direct quid pro quo. The remaining hostages were flown to West Germany and then returned to the United States, where they received a hero's welcome. The resolution was criticized by some as a concession to terrorism, potentially encouraging future incidents. Aftermath and legal consequences. The perpetrators faced mixed justice. Mohammed Ali Hamadeh, arrested in Germany in 1987 with explosives. Convicted in 1989 of murder, hijacking, and other charges, sentenced to life. Paroled in 2005 and returned to Lebanon. The U.S. sought extradition unsuccessfully. Reports of his death in a 2010 drone strike remain unconfirmed. He has been on the FBI Most Wanted list. Hassan Izz al-Din and Ali Atwa remain fugitives on the FBI's Most Wanted terrorists list. Hezbollah has consistently denied direct responsibility, though the operation aligned with its goals. Impact on aviation security and U.S. policy. The hijacking prompted significant changes. It led to strengthened air marshal programs, foreign airport assessments, and greater emphasis on intelligence sharing. It influenced the creation of more robust counterterrorism frameworks in the 1980s and 1990s, paving the way for post-9/11 reforms. Politically, it reinforced Reagan's no concessions rhetoric while exposing its practical difficulties. It also highlighted the challenges of dealing with non-state actors backed by Iran and Syria. Legacy and cultural memory. TWA Flight 847 remains a symbol of resilience and the costs of terrorism. Books, documentaries, and memorials honor the victims, especially Robert Stetham. The incident is studied in counterterrorism training and aviation history courses. The aircraft itself returned to service and was later retired. Captain Testrake and others wrote accounts of their experiences. Annual remembrances continue, emphasizing themes of courage in the face of evil. In broader terms, the hijacking underscored how terrorism exploits media attention and civilian vulnerabilities. It was part of a pattern that would culminate in larger attacks like 9/11, driving home the need for proactive global security measures. The story of TWA Flight 847 is ultimately one of human endurance amid political madness. From the bravery of Robert Stetham to the professionalism of the crew and the diplomatic maneuvering that ended the crisis, it reveals both the worst and best of humanity in crisis. While justice for all perpetrators remains incomplete, the event continues to inform efforts to prevent similar tragedies.